Hi, TV land. Oh, before we start, the local cable station here in Wichita where we're doing this asked, they're part of it's the Independent Cable Owners Association of America. At any rate, they asked if all of you people watching, they have picked our show since we're in so many cities now, that all of you out there watching this on cable, if just right quick, they were trying to do a survey. And they want to know who all actually was paying for cable service and who had their brother-in-law hotwired from the telephone pole. So everyone who's paying, would you raise your hand? Okay. I just told them I'd do that. All right, so now we're going with the show. What we're doing, we're cooking tonight is a Cambodian, sort of a Cambodian version of pasta done with fresh, it's done with fresh chickpeas. And I guess in lieu of that, we'll do some of the Kyroots. Wherein I tried to put some sort of sauce on these. Here we go. The early ones. I'll read it. And Kyroots said, one man picked up the following conversation. First man says, man's freedom of will is like a fly in a web that can think. Another guy says, you mean the web or the fly? If I was Old English, I would be tempteth not to speaketh on this. But you could consider from a real cheap shot right quick, you could say, well, somebody started out saying the whole idea that men debating and arguing forever, do we have freedom of will, and etc. That you could look at as being a fly trapped in a web, like a spider's web. Now, forget the poor aspect, even though the spider's got the eat of death and all that, the fly's alive, but he's there. And he can make movement, he can do almost everything except one thing. Well, two things. He can't fly and he can't seem to get away, but it's all the same thing. But this guy says the idea of freedom of will, he doesn't just say it exists or doesn't exist. He says it's like a fly in a web that can think. But then the second guy wants to know, are you saying that the idea of freedom of will is like a fly trapped in a web and the fly can think? That the fly is the only way that the fly has some kind of interest in speculating, am I free here? Can I get away? What's done this? Is this my fate? Is this destiny? Or is there some trauma in my childhood that subconsciously made me fly into this web? Or, well, flies have childhoods, I guess. Or is the guy saying that the concept, the notion, the theory of freedom of will is like a fly in a web, and the web can think? Which does that? Would put a different spin. Because what if it seemed to be that which trapped you instead of, again, rather than this first guy saying that the idea of freedom of will is a canard, it is baseless, or if he's saying it is an absolute fact, and I will offer proof at some later date. He just goes ahead and says that the idea is like a fly in a web, and the web can think. So now you've got it, that it's changed, that not the apparent creature, that in this case that the fly is there in some way trapped, and yet it has some freedom of movement. It's still alive, it's beating around, it's still in space, it's not down on the ground, it's not been buried, it's not under leaves, it's actually still there spatially in something resembling its normal condition of flying around, but it just can't seem to move. If it indeed the guy meant that the fly can think, then the fly would begin to have some kind of notion that I'm doing almost everything I normally do. You know, flapping my wings, I'm having fly thoughts, I'm looking around, I'm in my natural, more or less, environment. I look around and there's a 3D spatial world here, but something is amiss. Now, if instead of that, if the first man meant that the notion of freedom of will is like a fly in a web, and when he said that can think, that he meant the web can think, then consider that rather than it being what would seem to be from the first viewpoint, that the environment, that which is captious, that which is holding, at least in slight abeyance, that's having a partial grip on the fly's erstwhile freedom. And so that is now the very culprit that would seem to be trapping the fly. What if it could think? What would it think about something within its being frolicking around? Something within it that is alive, something within it that, let's say that the web can think. And let's say at least as well as a man, because that's all you can normally imagine anyway. What would it think to have something alive in it? That the fly is not dead, the fly is everything, notwithstanding the fact that he's trapped temporarily or permanently in the web, but the fly is still batting around, the fly is alive, and now what would seem to be the environment, what would seem to be that which has captured the fly, if it could think, what would it think? What notions would it have about freedom of will? Like, what's this thing doing here? Remember, I'm talking about the spider. The spider knows what it's doing there. The spider was the one that would be after the dinner. We're talking about the web. The web's just there minding its own business, and a fly gets into it. Something alive. And it tries to get out. Look at all the things that the web could think. Like, well, whatever this thing is that's alive in me seems to want to get out. But hey, I didn't invite it here. I didn't tell it to come here. It could be tearing at little strands of its web, trying to get out. And the web could be thinking, give me a break. Or the web could say, well, obviously this thing in me is trying to get out. But why is it taking out on me? I didn't tell it to come here. So much for page 3. Well, the main thing is to shell the green peas before we put them in the food processor. And you should try and make the sauce probably. Well, you can do it a day or so early and put it in the freezer. It'll run it, but put it in the freezer if you want to. What do I care? This is not a cooking show. Put it in your shoe. I hate to be harsh about it, but you keep asking me what to do. I'm not a damn cook. Do I have a hat on? And Kyroots, the unlicensed city commentator, commented. I'll reread this one. Somebody requested it, but I noticed here in the the studio, that there was, I sensed no reaction when it was read, but here it goes. It's sort of a poem, evidently, because it's printed in that little sissy-looking stuff, whatever you call it, italic. But anyway, it says, better that than it's printed like it's a recipe. This is what, you got to remember the heading now. This is a city commentary. Quote, while being a lover neath civilized cover, it's hard not to become a shadow of one. It's bad enough for somebody to slip in poetry, isn't it? But is it worse even to comment? It's the hardness. I'll go ahead and do it because everyone's had the experience. We're back to, for an exemplary, temporary approach, dividing man's life again into the primary and the secondary. And the primary being that which would be minimally, absolutely necessary to live, and the primary and the secondary, in a sense, not being necessary, although it is. At the primary level, you wouldn't talk about being a lover. I guess you could. That's what blues songs are about. That's what most poetry is about. That's what this is getting at. Well, another one tonight really gets at it. If you were a primary beast, to again compare men to just animals, then just the sex act, just rutting, just keeping the race together, you don't really, unless you are Jesus, unless you're terminally poetic, I guess, you don't look or hear about mooses doing it and think, the mooses are in love. I mean, you can. There's no law against it, but I'm glad you don't live in a condo next to me. But you see what I mean? People do not look at an elephant, a male elephant coming up to a female elephant and jumping her, or as they say in the zoos in Mississippi, jumping her bones. And people do not even, I don't think, Marlon Perkins, when he was alive, and I don't know what he's doing after he's dead, but I don't even think he would look at the elephant and say, the elephant's a lover. The point is, if it was down at the primary level, you don't think about love. It has to be at the secondary level. It is then when the intellect, when the higher end of the nervous system, that which is speaks. That's the only way you can become a lover. That's the only way you can be in love. And you, by most accounts, by any reasonable account, I don't blame it on people, you've got to have sex involved to be a lover. Because if you're not, then they have to distinguish it anyway and call it platonic love. Which is a nice way of saying fake love. It's like saying you're an elephant without an erection or something. I'm not sure. That's not the best. An unhorny elephant. But now listen, the point is to be, in the secondary sense, to be a lover, part of it is here. And of course, that's sort of an understatement from one view, because even though it's just part of it, without this, you can't be a lover, is what we already started pointing out. But part of being in love is here. That's part of being civilized. It's part of being everything that distinguishes man from lower creatures on this planet. So, the intellect is involved if you're in love with somebody. Of course, it's true with friendship, but let's stick with this for a second, because this is what strikes most people of more important. If you're in love, this is playing a part of it. That is the whole thing about bringing gifts to one another and bringing candy, being sweet, opening doors, and everything. Everything besides actually screwing. Everything besides sex, everything else is part of being a lover, and it comes from here. It does not come from your genital areas. I hate to be technical for you people living in Idaho, but call your mother and ask her what that means. So now back to the poem. So this has to be involved. You cannot be a lover, you cannot be in love. And so it starts out, while being a lover neath civilized cover, which what they're saying is that you are, just what I've described, you are in a civilized mode, that you're not just involved with sex, that you are involved with being in love, that this is involved. So while being a lover in the civilized cover, it's hard not to become a shadow of one. I want to explain the last two lines. I tried to explain the first two. Jesus. You do the last two. All right, I'll give you one hint. Do you know that one of the most popular syndicated shows on television I read is Divorce Court? And Kyroots said, well, that, and there's some offshoot cable, so I've heard, some old cable outfit that I think is an outlaw, they're not even licensed, it's somewhere up, it's outside of Akron, and all they do is show still photographs of people who shot their husband or wife, and it goes on day and night. Well, I assume them being a non-commercial, not even non-licensed, that they cannot afford to purchase the rights to things like Divorce Court. And Kyroots said, these were sort of connected. You know, Kyroot has been using, I think, he hasn't denied it, buildings and basements and the penthouse as being some sort of allegory for the human nervous system. Thusly, it goes, page 20, and Kyroots said, a chap in a bush jacket explained, quote, there are many wild creatures in the jungle, and many of them now have taken refuge in people's basements. Next page, and Kyroots said, some of the mid-floor thinkers have always believed that the way of progress, the way to civilization, increased gentility, is to feed lions strained carrots. For any of you think that there is no new approach to allegories, have you ever heard morality referred to as strained carrots? Have you ever heard religion referred to as one of the outstanding products of the Gerber Company? It's a kind of belief, it's not that far removed again from the poem of being a city lover, is a belief that you can take the primary parts of man and in some way actually change them by feeding them that which would not be native to them. It's by getting people in the basement, it's by getting beer drinkers to drink champagne. That if you could get them to drink champagne, they would suddenly have, let us say, the sophistication, the educational, maybe champagne's not the right one since most people drink cheap champagne, so I've heard. Wine drinkers. How would that be? That it's the kind of belief, if this one was too obscure, I'll make it even worse, that if you took beer drinkers down in the basement and you changed their liquid diet from beer to a decent wine, that per se, maybe not, but within a couple of days, a couple of weeks, would turn them into civilized, sophisticated, in some way, I don't know how, but would give them probably something approaching a college education. It's feeding strained carrots to lions. It is not far removed from that, by the way, if that is still too obscure, to those kind of people who say you are what you eat. It's just as always in the city, it sounds fine, but you can't ask for any sort of evidence. I mean, not even a little piece. You shouldn't even bring it up. Because if anything could be proved, it would be the big O, and I don't mean Otis Redding, it would be the opposite. There was actually one before this that no one requested that was kind of a wraparound sarong of several of these. If we have time, somebody requests it, this touches on the two I just read in kind of a backhanded way. It was during a dress rehearsal, blah, blah, blah. An oboe refinisher on outcall said, "Man has a deep longing for spiritual rituals." That's what the clarinetist said to this guy who was refinishing somebody's oboe. And the repairman said, he agreed, he said, "Yes, I agree, and it's not unlike how a dog can drive you nuts, turning around and around and around and around before he'll finally lay down." And a bassoonist sitting nearby heard this and was struck. He thought to himself, it's curious how both shellac and death can cause a man to wipe his hands and say, well, I guess that about wraps up my work around here. No. If we're still going to play TV, I guess that's another good reason to be on cable, not have a sponsor. The sponsor can't come to you and say, I don't like the way things are going. Well, shit, sir, I don't either. And I'm not even a sponsor. And Kyroots said, as he began to understand what suicide implied in a neural revolutionist sense, as one man realized that he had wasted his whole life up to that point and damn near all of his previous deaths as well. That's for all of you fans. Kyroots used the word suicide so many times in the last month. I'm sure that we've got Dr. Shavorgian or whoever he is now probably on our string a fan club for us. Not that kind of suicide, doctor. Unless you think it is. And if you think it is, I don't know why. I'm probably too late to advise you otherwise. Oops. It was an unauthorized voice, said Kyroots, that replaced that of the normal control tower voice, and this voice announced planes without plans can go ahead and land. And as is the case so frequently, this part you need to remember because the next one even refers to it if you want to. This is the last part of it. And as is the case so frequently in certain out-of-the-way areas, some of the bystanders, could not be immediately certain as to what had just occurred. That is, this voice saying all planes without plans can go ahead and land. Some of the bystanders could not be certain whether what had just happened, this unusual event, was beneficial or injurious. And if you're a rights advice doctor, as regards the cosmic neural network and it being an integral part of the life of life, would a revolutionist at the routine level be more plugged in or less plugged in? And he says, sir, I refer you to the last part of that Kyroot. The many bystanders in certain areas can never be absolutely certain as to what just occurred, whether it was beneficial or injurious. But back to the page before, there was another addendum I didn't read that says, but hey, what are you paid to live in the city for anyway? You mean to be confused and not be sure? Many civilians, just ordinary thinkers, they believe that just because they have a job or they get sick or somebody steps on their foot, well, if they have a job and have to get up in the morning and pay taxes, they think that that is them paying for life. That, well, I'm paying for my keep, I work, or if you don't work, I have to go down once a week and sign up for the benefits and stand in line down there at the welfare office or whatever you do. That's not it. This is what you're paid for. You mean being confused? I didn't say that. Those were your words. Kyroots and I went through this whole thing about a control tower and planes and landing. I went, oh, no. It was you that said, you mean be uncertain and confused? And Kyroots said, secondary tomorrows do not come from a rising sun, but rather via criticism of today. Short, sweet, and to the point if you understand it. The secondary world. The primary world, obviously, if we're going to take it at a cosmic, physical, material level, tomorrow comes about. I know this is sort of figurative, but it's as good as any. Tomorrow comes about by the sun coming up tomorrow. If the sun comes up tomorrow, let's forget what we call it. If we go to bed tonight or hang around, and what's this stuff you call at night? Darkness. If sometime in the next 8 or 10, 12 hours, we sat there long enough, this darkness starts kind of disappearing, and that red thing comes up, and then you would have to say, if you were literate, if I said, all right, what is this? And you'd have to say, well, it looks like tomorrow. And tomorrow's here again. That tomorrow is brought on by the sun rising. Kyroots points out that that's not true of the secondary world. It doesn't take the sun rising. That's not what brings tomorrow on. What brings tomorrow on is criticism of today. That assures you of tomorrow. And Kyroots said the thing about a creature, about being a creature with a dimensional awareness that's one less dimensional than the environment in which it lives. The example that he gives, obviously being us, man's binary mind in a 3D universe. The thing about being in that position is that a sense of direction is not necessary then to go somewhere. I know you think it is, which is part of the criticism of life, is worrying, well, people are in my way, or I can't go where I want to because there's not a bus running, or where it's running, it costs too much. That's all part of the fuel that makes the bus appear to run, that makes you believe, well, I'm either on the way or I missed the bus again, which is the same thing. In either case, you got a secondary career and you're kind of nervous. Fretting. A lot of people sure did like that one for nobody to request it. That to have a secondary career, it's imperative that you be very nervous. Stay nervous. I think it went. But if your awareness is one-dimensional less than the environment, which it is here, under normal conditions, then having some sense of direction is not imperative to go somewhere. And then taking it surely beyond a physical level, it means the idea that you can intellectually go somewhere, that you can figure things out, that you can become a better, more enlightened, more developed person. You don't have to know what the hell that means. If it did, all the temples and the churches and everything to pick that out would be out of business. And then right after them, after all the universities and colleges laughed at them, they'd have it about another month or so and they'd be deserted. They'd be out. It's not necessary to go somewhere in the secondary sense. If you got one less, if you're aware, consciously as we would call it, of one less dimension than the environment itself consists of, then for the appearance, the operational appearance, I don't mean it's just an illusion, but the feeling that you're going somewhere, it is not necessary in those conditions to have any sense of direction. I started to say, don't make it clear, and what I was about to say, I'm not sure will, but I will anyway. Under those conditions, no matter where you move, you're going somewhere, is the point. It's only after the fact that you think, well, I misstepped. You stepped. You didn't have a choice. If you're not dead, you're stepping. But then ordinary people, of course, as they're supposed to, will say, well, now wait. I guess you're right, I am stepping, but that's not where I want to go. And of course, they don't see it. Life, if it wonders fun, would go, that's all right. No, I don't care. And of course, well, if you like that, I can take it to even sillier extremes, and a person would go, well, I do care. And life would kind of go, well, all right, but who the hell is it you think made you think you care? And you'd be saying there, yes, but I am a serious person. I'm a decent person, and I care where I'm going. In other words, I would hate to be fooled. I would hate to be trying to better myself, and I've got a self-help book here, and what if the book is a fraud? And what if the improvement I've made on myself, what if it's not the right kind of improvement? Or what if I've improved myself, and I find out someday that was fake improvement? I repeat the last line. Under these conditions, a sense of direction, and it's in big letters here, is not necessary to go somewhere. All right, to go anywhere. If you're alive, you're going somewhere. But if you're alive and ordinary, you always say, well, I'm either not going exactly the right place, or if I am headed in the right direction, I'm not going fast enough. And if I'm not headed in the right direction, I know whose fault it is. And life said, sir, it's not necessary. Of course, if life ever said that to ordinary people, it didn't say it loud at all. Now for one of Kyroots, quote, flashcard, think about it. The psychology of animals is in their behavior. What is it in man? I happen to know that Kyroot has been saving this one, Jesus. God, it's either been several years or it was earlier this afternoon. Well, you know how easy it is to confuse the two. Let's just take ordinary views, since Kyroot uses dogs and elephants. And the psychology of animals. And you do know that there are, now in the secondary in the city world, they're considered, accepted to be animal psychologists. That actually, you go pay them to treat the the psychological problems of your domestic pets. I'm not sure they're any doing large animals. I'm not sure there's a cow psychologist. I wouldn't bet against it, but to my knowledge right now, the heart of this new blossoming profession in the grand area of psychology is in domesticated pets. But at any rate, the psychology, and I'm not laughing at what they... Oh, all right. What they describe as the psychology of animals, I don't think anybody's gone off the deep end yet in the city to actually saying that they're thinking or having human emotions. But when they describe, and they would probably want to say, well, quotation marks, psychology of animals. It's in their behavior. That's all you can go by, because that's all they are. Now, I forget how much they know. I just using it as a springboard, since even out there in the city, the collective have gotten far enough to think about a psychology of animals. Good night on cable. And, well, don't let them catch what you're doing.